to see more people also connecting a bit later on in the day. But for now, we have such a good audience and we're really excited to unpack the different topics that we'll be discussing today. So the rationale behind the event is really to get Namibian youth to give their input as to African-European relations ahead of the EU summit that is scheduled to take place towards the end of October this year. So we'll have such a good lineup of speakers who will be unpacking some issues to do with the digital era, some issues to do with politics and good governance, agriculture, and the list goes on. I'll introduce them one by one a bit later when we start with the program. And then I think what I'm going to be doing now is I'd like the ambassador, the head of the European delegation to Namibia, Ambassador Sinika Antila, to do the introductory remarks, and then we can kick off with our program. Ma'am?
Okay, good morning, everybody, dear participants to this Youth Speak. Dear youth representatives, my colleague, Ms. Ellen Gölsch from German Embassy, all media that is following this forum. I am really excited to be here and opening this event to hear the views of the Namibian youth on these key issues: education, skills, digitalization, climate change, governance, and so on. And why I'm excited about this is that European Union and Africa, we are long-term partners, and our partnership is more important than ever now because we are going through this terrible COVID pandemic. So we need to strengthen our partnership. And as you heard, we are planning our action for the European Union and African Union summit later, and we feel that it will be really important to hear from the youth, because Africa is a youthful continent. You are the leaders in the years to come. So we want to hear, are we doing the right things? What should the European Union do to help African countries? What kind of partnership we should do in sustainable development, in investment, in trade, in digitalization, in creating jobs. We want to create jobs for the youth. We want to empower women, and we want to use all of our capacities, joint capacities and skills and technology to forward these messages. And we have, that's why we have created this kind of platforms. To hear the youth voices. There are other platforms. We have been also working with the African Union, European Union Youth Cooperation Hub. Also the Pan-African Youth Union has been important partner, and in the summit itself, there will be a youth summit. So I am really excited to hear your views, and take my word, I will take your messages further to the leaders and to the summit. So have a good exchange. I will be following it from here, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that, and we will hold you accountable to your word that you will indeed take some of the suggestions that will come through in today's conversation all the way to the summit. With that said, we also have Ms. Ellen Gölsch, the Charge d'Affaires from the German Embassy, here with us this morning, and she will also be doing some introductory remarks. Ma'am, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, fellow speakers, dear participants. Also from my side, a very good morning to all of you. And yeah, we live in challenging times, and who would be better suited to take up new challenges but the young generation? On behalf of the German Embassy, I would therefore like to thank IPPR and the European delegation in Namibia, led by Ambassador Sinika Antila, for organizing this virtual meeting on the future we want. We very much appreciate the opportunity to participate. And in the 6 months from July to December this year, Germany holds the rotating presidency of the European Union. Many of the plans that have been made for this presidency and the goals set last year had to be adapted due to the global COVID-19 pandemic. However, one of the most important tasks during the presidency continues to be, together with the other European institutions, the preparation of the upcoming summit between the African Union and the European Union, the AU-EU summit. And as the President of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said last week in her State of the Union address at the European Parliament plenary, and I quote, "Africa will be a key partner in building the world we want to live in, whether on climate, digital, or trade. To become key partners, first of all, we need to know each other better. And in that regard, at least in my personal view, although Africa and Europe are neighboring continents, there's still a There we go. Okay. Thank you very much for your support. Yeah, I think it shows that we still have a number of challenges, but we are facing head on. So as Europeans, we are eager to know more about the ideas of African citizens and the youth in particular on what a future world day, so you, want to live in and should look like. The AU-EU summit comes at a critical moment. The COVID-19 pandemic poses a historical challenge to both Africa and Europe and constitute a threat to the progress made in recent years. As a Team Europe, the European Union and its member states have swiftly mobilized support to efforts in most, if not all, African countries in combating the crisis. Also in Namibia, the Team Europe has provided support. And for Germany, the COVID-19 related support to Namibia so far amounts to about 850 million Namibian dollars. The scale of the pandemic shows how vital a strong AU-EU relationship and partnership is, not only in addressing the long-term socio-economic and health impacts of COVID-19, but also in dealing with other global emergencies in the future. However, the need for a strong partnership between EU and AU extends far beyond the current COVID crisis. We want to strengthen our political partnership with the AU to confront the big global challenges of our time jointly with African neighbors. Climate change, digitalization, migration, and mobility are some of the priorities which we deem important in the years ahead. It is essential that also African countries identify their own priorities for their partnership with the EU. The phrase, "never let a good crisis go to waste," attributed to Winston Churchill, has been repeated quite often in the current global pandemic. What it means, in my view, is that a crisis is also an opportunity to do things you think you could or would not do before. I wish you all to be able to seize this opportunity and make the best out of the current situation. Therefore, I can only encourage you, as the young generation of Namibia, to think about your vision for yourself, your country, the African continent, and the relationship to Europe and other parts of the world. What are your interests, your priorities, and what are you ready to commit? In short, what is the future you want? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Gouls, for those introductory remarks. We're very excited as Namibian youth to definitely be participating in the process towards unpacking some of the issues that we believe that synergies can be attained between our African continent and the European Union as a whole. With that said, we will then go on to introduce our panelists for today. I will introduce them one by one as they come on. Dear panelists, you are reminded that you have exactly 10 minutes to give your remarks. So please, let's stick to the time that has been prescribed. So our first speaker is Ms. Rochelle Naido. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, otherwise apologies. Ms. Rochelle is an entrepreneur in agriculture and has over 7 years farming experience. She's one of the youngest farmers involved in cattle breeding. She's a certified agro processor after completing her studies in China. She will then be speaking on agriculture, climate change, and prospects for a green recovery. Rochelle, the opportunity is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for IPPR and the partners today for inviting us to such a platform that is indeed very timely and very necessary. I'm an advocate for precision farming, and precision farming is a topic that is not very well known on the African continent in terms of uh, the more established and older farmers. It's a concept very new to them, but it's a concept that I advocate for the youth and for the future. The kind of future that we want needs a very different perspective and a change in mind and sort of a different way of looking at things. Climate change has a direct impact on agriculture. It is also one of the very important topics that we can never leave behind when talking about transforming the agricultural sector, not only for farmers, but for traders, business people, and generally for the food security of this continent. Food systems are essential to economic activity because they provide the energy we need to live and work. However, microeconomists have long ignored them in the belief that the global agri-food industry, now highly mechanized, subsidized, and concentrated, offers all we could wish for when it comes to food. The revolution of agriculture dates back to the 17th and 19th centuries. It's not a new concept. But in light of that, I just wish to also highlight a few challenges we face as agriculturalists, especially in the youth sector on the continent, not only in this country. The challenges we face are, amongst others, barriers to trade, sustainable business models. There is a lack or there is a disconnect between coming up with sustainable business models that could carry us through, but would always manage risks such as external factors that can come in. Very good example is COVID-19. We're having a panel discussion on a virtual platform. Not only so, we don't know when such a disruption in the world economies may come again. There's also a challenge in integrated farming practices where for long, conventionally, farmers would be operating in silos and isolation. Now is the time that as youth, we would have to integrate farming practices and as young professionals, try to synergize with smart partnerships, ways in which we can centralize the agricultural sector. We could see that with COVID, it exposed a lot of shortcomings within the economic spaces because we relied on trade and export, especially the farmers, on a road and railway network. Once the borders were closed, a lot of livelihoods were lost. We had farmers that sat with production that they couldn't take out. These are just few of the examples. Henceforth, we would really need an integrated farming practice system. There's also a disconnect between youth and policymakers. I feel we should start synergizing and have some space as youth on the table and around the table with policymakers, because we would have to really, really cement the kind of future we want. And this is not just in agriculture, it is in transforming business as usual. It's in transforming economies. For long as youth, we were not really directly involved with the economy and trade. And there were always other special purpose vehicles and opportunities for youth. I think now is a very important time that we would really have to be allowed a place on the round table. Another challenge is the limited access to research. I still believe that knowledge is the new gold and oil. The more you know, the more prepared you are, and that's when opportunity meets preparation. I think there's nothing that we can emphasize more than youth being prepared through research. And you don't have to be a farmer to research on issues. You could be a youth leader, you could be a businesswoman, um, and you would see, I'm so proud and very privileged to be on a panel with other youth leaders, very, very, very powerful young women that have equipped themselves with the latest news on markets. So, without only just focusing on the challenges, I'd always like to speak on the prospects of what we want, the future we want as youth in terms of agriculture. We've heard of e-governance, we've heard of uh, the technological revolution. Why can't we speak of e-farming? Why can't we speak of creating continental and worldwide networks where we are able to know what are the kind of products that are in deficit on this continent, what are the kind of staple foods, what are the kind of services we need. Again, the change would be that a lot of jobs would be lost on big farms because everything would now have artificial intelligence. We would be using virtual concepts to sort of control the farming practices, which is the new norm. Conventionally, many, many years ago, um, our elders used to farm, and the main priority was to be physically there and not do anything else. Currently, that doesn't allow for the kind of transformation the youth sector is going through. So at this stage, you would still be able to take part in farming practices and be elsewhere doing your degree or be elsewhere working, etc. Other prospects could be that we could create a very, very wide network and on a technology and digitization basis, sort of integrate the different youth, not just farmers, traders, business women, businessmen. Um, so these are the kind of prospects that one would like to see. And if I'd like to probably drill down to the mere basics of what happens to the normal farmer, what happens to the normal producer. Um, are we going to have a second wave of COVID-19? I remember I had an article just a month after the COVID-19 breakout in Namibia on how there would be very, very much more opportunities in the logistics sector and agricultural sector because there was a high demand for food. However, these things change very quickly because these are all very integrated elements and issues to sustaining the economy. So if more and more people are getting retrenched, that means more and more people will need food. However, they wouldn't be affording the food. These are the kind of challenges that one could observe, experience, and see. I could experience it in my own farming systems on our farm. I could experience it in my entrepreneurial journey. And the kind of prospects and the kind of planning we should be doing as youth at this stage is to see how we can allow for business continuity, how we can allow for life to go on beyond a pandemic such as this. How can we sort of encompass and emphasize on the need for home gardens? How can we advocate for people to be more aware of the kind of gene pools they go into? Um, One of the very, very, very serious things that I speak on many platforms, especially on my thought leadership journey, has been the importance of very good gene pools. These are things that were very foreign in terms of the agricultural sector because people were conditioned to believe that they would have to farm with a full crowd or they would have to farm with over 100 or 200 livestock to be seen as worthy or as a farmer. These were not sustainable. And I think The reason why I advocate for precision farming is because it's very, very, very linked to the sustainable models that we need to adapt in terms of understanding the challenges brought forth by climate change. Um, Climate change remains. It's not something that goes away with a pandemic. It's not something that goes away with recession. Climate change is an ongoing conversation, and that conversation needs to be had. We are in different geographical areas of the world. Um, just to note, in my farming setup, I've realized that the rainfall trends have totally changed. I have no control over it. However, the ability to do research and to adapt to climate change and to model your business plan, your sustainable plans and models to what's happening in terms of climate change really, really, really helps. I speak of experience because um, you can pray for rain, but it's not something that you'll be able to plan for. This year, our raining season started a month earlier, something that doesn't normally happen. A few years ago, we experienced El Nino. We had one of the worst droughts in history. Um, the last past raining season was one of the best raining seasons. So we are in very uncertain times, but these uncertain times should be a very, very big opportunity for us to sort of see how we can really integrate. How can we take best practices, benchmark them, make them local? My experience as a young farmer might not be the same to the experiences of a young farmer in Europe or in Asia. However, there must be some sort of integration and collaboration that we can have to be able to know where my markets are, to be able to know what their needs are. So that is basically a very, very, very important aspect of precision farming that I advocate on platforms. I also wish to note that student leadership, the economics, the policymakers, all on different levels, they really serve a very important purpose for farmers like myself. Um, I have been farming for the past over 7 years. Um, I have diversified and I work on a sustainable model where I'm able to have 3 or 4 production lines on a very small setup. Why? Due to the inaccessibility to land. Two, it's sort of to mitigate risk. Um, we are not in a economic atmosphere where we can focus on just one production line. And now I'm speaking to the farmers. I think that language you will be able to understand that you can't focus on one line. You would have to really, really see how your business will continue when there's a crisis. And over and above the crisis, there are other external factors that come to play. With the crisis, we're still going to feel the ripple effect of it for years to come. We can start feeling the inflation. There's a lot of job uncertainty. There's a lot of agricultural business models that are now being changed and transformed into sort of digital environments. More and more people, farm workers, lose their jobs. But this is the new normal. We, we might start speaking of artificial intelligence in the years to come. And I think we should be bold enough as youth to adapt. We shouldn't work in isolation in our own country and in our own continent. We should be able to really see what's happening out there, adapt, but also be proactive and not just responsive. I think as youth, we've been very responsive in this country in terms of the challenges that were brought by COVID-19. But this should be a great lesson that we should be proactive. I think platforms such as these give us the opportunity to be very, very proactive about what's really happening and the kind of future we want, the kind of business environments we want, the kind of farming environments we want. We should probably also be moving away from, you know, relying solely on our government, relying solely on the private sector. We must be able to, as young farmers, become partners to governments. We must be able to become partners to organizations, collaborate. I believe in a very holistic view in terms of my business modeling when it comes to my farming practices. And I try to integrate skills training, research. I try to integrate a little bit of CSI, a little bit of corporate social responsibility on a different level. So as much as the business is really centered around creating the revenue as a farmer, you must be able to diversify your model in such a way that you're constantly researching and creating pilot projects to see what fits your market. We will be speaking in the next few years of a different kind of feed for our animals. We can't speak on the same kind of mixture that has been there. Why? Because of climate change. Why? It has affected nature. The kind of grazelands that we find now are very, very different because nature really changes with climate change. These are the kind of research
Rochelle,
when
just to,
yes,
Rochelle, kindly
yes,
start wrapping up. Time is of essence.
okay. So I think in conclusion, I would really like to encourage young farmers, those in the agriculture sector, to really invest in building capacity, building knowledge, in skills training, research, and also integrating their models. I really wish all the best for all the young farmers. We're ready, we're bold, and we should take on the future and create the future we want. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Rochelle, for that insightful contribution. Farming or agriculture as a sector is said to be a low-hanging fruit in Namibia. So it was very interesting that you already hit the ground running when it comes to vision casting the future that we want, where we're discussing sustainable business models, the need for capacity building interventions, as well as really just throwing the challenge out there that why are we not exploring e-farming? And I think for the sake of the Q&A session, it's very interesting to contrast some of your suggestions for the reality that we're in this country, especially when we know that just access to land itself is a challenge for many young people. And also some bottlenecks like communal farming, the red line. So I think I'm hoping actually that the participants will have quite a lot to engage you on in the Q&A. So, and I think your last remaining points could perhaps also be something that you can add during the Q&A session, or depending on which questions are addressed towards you. Once again, thank you so, so much. I really enjoyed your presentation. With that said, I would like to introduce the next speaker, Mrs. Patience Masua, who will be speaking on education for the 21st century. She's the Namibia Country Director of the Southern Africa Youth Forum. She's also the former Secretary General of the Namibian National Students Organization and a widely published writer on issues of social justice, gender-based violence, and youth empowerment. Patience, the opportunity is all yours.
Raquel, thank you very much. So today my speech is going to be centered, I think, primarily on education, particularly with an outlook for what we want to see going forward. But I think it would be remiss if we don't have a lens that really magnifies how COVID-19 has changed the landscape of how students and learners are educated across the world. So I will be paying attention to that and really looking at three particular pillars. The first one, how education has led to innovations and our adaptability and readiness to accept those innovations and use them. The second pillar that I'll be looking at is strategic partnerships. We're looking at NGOs, government, organizations such as the EU, organizations such as the UN, the AU, and how those strategic partnerships are particularly important for education in the 21st century, but particularly education in adapting to the effects of COVID-19. And thirdly, something very particular to Namibia, we're going to be looking at access and how access, if not if people don't have access to education, how that minimizes the quality, but also looking at solutions and how we can advance education for a purpose that is fit for the times that we're in now. So I think it goes without saying that COVID-19 has, of course, changed how people are educated around the world. And these changes give us a glimpse of how education could change either for the better or the worse. In Namibia, we've seen in the past couple of months that education had to go online because our government had to prioritize the health, and we had to mitigate the spreading of the virus. We've seen that the virus has rapidly spread, from 1 to 3 cases to hundreds and hundreds of cases per day. And these changes have caused a certain degree of inconvenience. So although it's slightly early to judge how much COVID-19 will affect education systems in our rural areas and in our peri-urban areas, the signs that we've seen so far suggest to us that COVID-19 will have an impact on the long-term trajectory of learning innovations, of digitization of learning, and how online learning as one of the platforms to learn should, on a long-term, complement traditional methods of learning. So let's look at the first pillar of my speech. Education, because of COVID-19, has obviously nudged us and pushed us to change, but we've seen surprising innovations. We've seen that schools could rapidly adapt to modes such as WhatsApp, to modes such as Google Classrooms, to modes such as Zoom that we're using now to educate each other. And we've seen that the traditional entrenched institutional ways of teaching have obviously been outmoded. Were we ready for this change? No, we weren't. But should we adapt to the change? Yes, we should, if we want to remain part of a global economy and of a global system that is moving forward and that is adaptable to the kind of changes that we're seeing. So we've seen that there was a lot of pressure put on our government, there was a lot of pressure put on private sector to search for innovative ways to have education continue and to protect the academic year in a very, very, very short period of time. We've seen this in basic education and we've seen this in higher education. We've seen that the University of Namibia had to rapidly introduce an online system for all full-time students. And we've seen that they adapted to an online examination system very rapidly. Those are the results that we welcomed, and those are the results that we're trying to push for when we talk about innovative ways. But the challenge that we faced is, of course, access to all of these platforms. And that is something that I'll dive into just a bit later in my speech. So we've seen that in China, for example, of course, proportionately speaking, their population is much higher than ours, but 120 million Chinese had access to education through live television broadcasts. Now, that is something that here in Namibia we didn't perhaps, or we couldn't perhaps welcome and pursue at the rate at which they have. But if they could empower 120 million people through television systems, then I think that is something that we could also pursue on a long-term basis with our National Broadcasting Corporation, the NBC, and other strategic partners that we could perhaps empower to promote this sort of education on the wider base that we want to do. But bringing it back home to Africa, we've seen that a Nigerian school, for example, they had, Google Classrooms, they had a synchronous face-to-face video instruction system that was augmented to sort of preempt school closures. And this was done way before the virus had spread at the rate that it has spread now. Similarly, we've seen that 5G technology, 4G technology has really helped, countries that have been affected by wars, for example, Lebanon, etc. So this contrast is just to show you that countries at worse extremes of poverty, inequality, countries that are at war, have managed to implement these systems. And I think that puts us in a greater position, and it places a greater accountability on our country's leadership to also implement such measures. We've also seen, and I think how online learning has really complemented traditional methods. But I think what COVID-19 has particularly highlighted to us, Raquel, is that learning should be integrated into our daily routines. And I think one thing that really stands out for me and that I'm really excited for, particularly, with our Vision 2030, with the AU, the goals for 2050 that we have in line with the SDGs, is really that learning should be able to take place anywhere at any time around the world. I do think that classrooms should, going forward, be available both online and offline. A very simple example is, a child who has parents who are diplomats, for example. They should be able to attend a Namibian school wherever they are around the world and still get that quality and still get the necessary support and still be able to attend that classroom, because we've seen that it is possible. So the second thing that I want to look at, and there's that I have a great expectation on, is public-private educational partnerships that are very, very important. I think going forward, we need to see a growth in these partnerships. We've seen, and this was very heartwarming, as early as May, we saw that publishing companies such as Pearson, government organizations, NGOs, the media, all stood together in one pursuit, or at least one of many pursuits, and that is educating the Namibian child. We saw that publishing companies were willing to make material readily available for teachers to develop. We saw that the ministry made teachers available to develop content for teaching to take place. We saw that newspapers were readily on standby to publish such material, but the only way that was possible was the strategic partnerships. Obviously, those were partnerships that were they were cemented on a short-term basis, but the expectation really is to look at how those partnerships can strategically be used to the benefit of all parties, but really towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goal pertaining to education, the goals in line with the Harambee Prosperity Plan that pertain to education, the goals in the AU Vision 2050 goals that pertain to education. And really, those are the type of partnerships that we need to see. We saw the MTCs and the telecoms holding hands, donating data to institutions of higher learning. We saw that students had access to internet that they previously did not have. And what was the outcome really? The outcome was that education was made available and education was brought to the Namibian child and to the Namibian student. How did we get that? only by strategic partnerships. It's not possible for government to provide all of these goals alone. It's not possible for the NGO space to get attain these goals alone. I know I'm running out of time. I'm about to wrap up. It's not possible for your EUs, your AUs, and your UNs to attain these goals alone. The only way that it's possible is to truly cement these strategic partnerships towards that common goal. My last point, Raquel, is on the issue of the digital divide and accessibility. This is particularly important in the Namibian context. We saw from statistics that we got from the Namibia Council for Higher Education that over 34,000 Namibian students did not have access to a laptop, did not have access to functional internet, and subsequently did not have access to materials available, right? To access online courses, to submit online assessments, etc. That is problematic for every Namibian child. Globally, only 60% of the globe is online, right? That tells you that for Namibia, that divide is much more starker. We've seen that children could not have access to their education because their parents don't have access to WhatsApp. Their parents don't know what WhatsApp is because their parents don't have even cell phones. We've seen, and we went out into the villages and we went to go look on the ground what the situation is. There aren't network towers close to everybody, to access education. I met with a medical student who had to walk to 2 farms away from him to access content every line. That tells you that access to education is still a problem. During the Q&A session, I will address how stakeholders can partner to solve these problems of education. Thank you very much, Raquel.
Oh, you're welcome. Patience, thank you so much for your very passionate input on the topic of education in the 21st century. And I think you highlighted very importantly the importance of public-private partnerships. I think that's a huge takeaway for today's discussion, especially considering that the conversation is really on the AU-EU relations and going forward post and amidst COVID-19 as well. Most of the time we realize that our different unions get into these agreements and they support, and oftentimes the governments are the implementers, and the governments do not necessarily have PPP frameworks in place. And so it's very important that this is something that should be clearly put on paper, that it's important that whatever needs to be implemented needs to take into consideration all actors from civil society, government, and the likes. So that's very, very good. Thank you so much for that. I would like to welcome the next speaker, Dr. Ellison Chirera, who will be speaking on governance and political inclusion. And he will be unpacking how the youth can influence decision-making as well as hold leaders accountable. To the participants, I'd like to remind you that we do have the chat option for your questions or comments. There's also the what is it? You can also, some are privately messaging me, that's fine, but ideally, get the conversation. Yes, or privately messaging Lucy, but it would be nice to share publicly so others can perhaps also get a bit of inspiration to also post their own questions. So please let's participate by raising our questions in advance. Raise your hand or put it in the chat option. I'm very excited that the number of participants has increased, so it means that more people are logging on. That's very exciting. Let me introduce Dr. Chirera. Dr. Chirera teaches sociology at the University of Namibia, and he has worked for the IPPR for over a decade, and he's also done some work for the Ministry of Gender Equality and Child Welfare. Let's welcome him to give his input.
All right. Thank you, Madam Moderator, for the opportunity and for the brief introduction. And thanks to IPPR for the invitation. Having observed that the previous speakers have taken quite a huge chunk of time, I would try and be very brief. I have been invited to provide some remarks on how can the youth influence decision-making and hold leaders accountable within the context of governance and political inclusion? I shall first provide a very brief context that would either facilitate or impede the extent to which young people can influence decision-making or hold their leaders accountable. Now, in terms of context, the EU ambassador did mention that Africa is a youthful continent, and equally so, Namibia is largely a youthful country. So in terms of numbers, more than 60% of the Namibian population fall under the category youth. Another point in terms of context is the fact that Namibia is a fairly democratic country. You would hardly hear of instances where people get locked up in prison for airing their views. I think we have kind of enough space to critique, sometimes even robustly and without any consequences. So that's a particular context that should allow youth to kind of flourish in terms of how they hold their leaders accountable. Notwithstanding the context that I just painted, it seems to me that there is this kind of extreme civility that has led to what I would call, for lack of a better phrasing, extreme docility. So we have people who are frighteningly friendly to the political establishment, and I think that's worrisome. Now, in terms of now addressing the main issue that I've been asked to address, which is how can the youth influence decision-making and hold their leaders accountable, I have 3 points here that I will briefly speak to and probably elaborate in the Q&A. The first one is that us as young people, as a constituency, we should try and organize around issues that appeal to the young people. So, and we have to identify what those issues are. If it is, say, employment or unemployment, we have to push for that in a more robust way. The second point is that there is a need for evidence-based engagement. And that can only happen when we follow debates in our country, what is happening, and read all these government documents, such that we kind of prepare ourselves better in terms of how we engage. And I think this point ties in with, I think, the first speaker or the first panelist who spoke about the issue of research-based kind of engagement. We have to pay particular attention to that, because without enough evidence or without enough facts, we are not in a position to engage robustly and productively. So if we don't have the information, if we don't know what is going on, we won't be able to engage in a more kind of informed and robust way. The third issue that I would like to speak to is that we have to pay more attention to local governance structures. It seems to me that for a very long time, we have gotten into this kind of spirit of thinking that local governance structures are insignificant, they don't matter, and most people or most young people always want to go to Tinte Palast. They want to go to Parliament, as opposed to paying more attention to these local structures. And this is where you really have kind of direct access to your elected representatives. Once an MP enters Parliament, he is responsible, or he or she is responsible for one constituency, which is Namibia. But if you are engaging more kind of in a direct way, it is with your local elected officials. And I'm saying this particularly because of the upcoming regional and local government elections. And I have somewhat noticed that there is some kind of indifference from young people when it comes to this kind of engagement. People don't go in their numbers to register to vote. They say, you know, what does it matter? But you see, that kind of staying away is a particular kind of decision that you make about your own future, as it were. Okay, now let me make a few, or let me say 3 to be exact, recommendations on or suggestions on how we should go forward in terms of kind of galvanizing youth as a constituency to hold their leaders accountable. The first one have got to do with still organizing around issues that affect young people, particularly beyond political affiliation, such that we avoid young people being surrogates of the ruling elite. A number of times you would see or hear about young people in, you know, kind of youth leagues of particular political parties defending the ruling elite, which is predominantly, you know, the elders or people of kind of colonial structural generation. And then, you know, instead of kind of coming together as a constituency and push for issues that affect us as a constituency, we tend to kind of get reproduced by these ruling elites. And then, of course, then we don't have a kind of prospects for any meaningful change that would kind of benefit the young people. Another issue is there is this kind of indifference generally to political and governance issues. And I would argue that it is very much perilous to the future of Namibia. So we should therefore be an active force. If we are to chart the future that we want, we have to be very much engaged. And then lastly, we have to closely follow debates in Parliament and form alliances with young MPs to push for issues that affect youth or young people at the legislative level. And I think we have seen some kind of good indications lately of more young people entering the National Assembly, for example. And I think we must use that opportunity to form alliances, liaise with these young people who probably understand our issues more than anyone, such that we push the youth agenda forward. With those few remarks, I thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Chirera, for your input. I think input was quite straightforward. There's not really much I can comment on. Perhaps something to take into consideration for the Q&A session is, yes, it's true, while in Namibia we have a space where we can really participate. There's an illusion of, I don't want to say an illusion, there is inclusion. There is inclusion and we can participate in the democratic process. I think maybe just later on you can maybe touch on some of the bottleneck at AU level perhaps, or what are some of the issues that gives the appearance that Namibians are not very interested in maybe, you know, participate. There's a voluntary program with the African Union. Very few Namibians actually participate in that. So maybe you can also just share how, in terms of also just diplomatic exchanges in future between the African Union, the European Union for young people, what are some of the opportunities that they can maybe anticipate and how can they go about it? It was actually a question that was asked privately, but I thought I might as well raise it here so that you can already give it some thought before we get to the Q&A session. All right, thank you so much. I'd like to call on the next panelist, Ms. Loide Ushona. She will be speaking on how the youth can drive business development and job creation. Ms. Ushona has a very lengthy bio, is the Managing Director of ProQuest Diagnostic Laboratories, a Namibian-owned medical laboratory. In 2018, she was selected among 200 women entrepreneurs across Africa and the diaspora as the African Women Entrepreneurship Cooperative Program inaugural cohort. All right. She currently serves as the president of the Namibia Association of Medical Lab Science and as a member of a very important professional committee on medical technology, medical laboratory science, and related professions. Ms. Ushona, I did not do you much justice, but the floor is all yours. So thank you, Madam Moderator. I think that was well articulated, well put. So thank you for that. So I'm going to take a fairly practical approach to this, and I will sort of start with our experience in business and the lessons we've learned, and just kind of relate that to business broadly. So when we started ProQuest a few years ago, us as the technical founding members or partners, if you will, had worked for all three industry leaders. And from this collective experience, we identified common gaps across the board. You can summarize these gaps as limited specialized services available, no innovation, little to no research, limited opportunities or growth opportunities for young professionals and for career development and progression, and the smaller areas of the industry for the most part remained neglected. So tackling these gaps while building a truly Namibian brand was the motivation for starting ProQuest. So we were able to, with some collateral, we were able to secure a DBN loan, mainly because if you look at our model, it is quite straightforward. So you are providing an essential service to for which the demand is ever growing. So we were actually able to secure a DBN loan. But what we struggled with, what we could not do and we struggled with over the years was to actually enter the market. Because one, you simply can't enter the private hospitals, private clinics, and the big medical centers because as they choose to only do business with established labs. Two, you simply can't get public work because this is under a state-owned enterprise. And as the smaller laboratories, we were then all left to compete for a small pool of individual practitioners, who required huge incentives to do business. So these were some of our challenges. But I would think that this story is not unique to us, and a lot of young entrepreneurs struggle with access to market. So from our experience, we can actually confirm that there is funding available for businesses. But while banks will fund traditional models or straightforward business models, they are more reluctant to fund innovative models. And that's where the biggest challenge lies, is that there is very little funding for more innovative models, and a lot more funding needs to go specifically for innovation. The big problem with this sort of traditional or more conservative funding approach is that if a company has not been able to evolve drastically over the past 10 years, is less likely going to evolve much in the next 10 years. So less jobs will be created and less opportunities will also be created. Secondly, if the new entrants cannot access the market, then it's the same, less jobs will be created and less opportunities. So it's also important to keep in mind that the government cannot sustainably create more jobs. That is just the reality of the situation. So if you really look at it realistically, more new jobs are going to be created by developing the current industries or creating new industries. Both of these two aspects speak very well to young people, as most young people want to innovate. They want to disrupt traditional models. And because that's the world we live in as young people, that is our world. We are excited by technology and what the technology has been able to achieve. So, and also in general, we want more out of life. So some of the areas that are underdeveloped, like manufacturing of cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, small goods, etc.
food production and processing, value addition, technology and services in general present opportunities. These all present opportunities for young people or young entrepreneurs. You know, we've noticed that over the years, more young people have taken interest into creating businesses. And that is great. It's commendable. But the only problem with this is that most of these small businesses are sort of created to meet the individual needs or to tackle the individual needs for employment and income generation for individuals, as opposed to really creating jobs broadly. And for these small businesses to create jobs, providing income or stable income for employees, they would have to formalize their business activities. This means that they'll have to have structures in place like admin, bookkeeping, client relations, and all those structures. For the formal, more formal businesses that may or may not have some of these structures, business development means that they need to be able to actually grow their businesses, right? And obviously, broadly, business development speaks to your ability to, or activities around increasing sales, building strategic partnerships, and overall creating or building strategies to expand and grow the business. The biggest challenge with that is then access to market. Most of these formal businesses are the businesses we expect to create jobs for the majority of the graduates. And a big challenge there that they'll face is the access to market, which is an issue we need to tackle. Obviously, you cannot speak about access or lack of access to funding without speaking about the issues around accessing the market. You just cannot, you can't run away from that, right? Obviously, the big chunk of challenges around access to market takes us to a very uncomfortable discussion over our history and, the question about whether to share the pie or not to share the pie, right? Well, I'm not going to get into that. I'll just leave that as a side note and sort of focus on things that can be done immediately. So while the government cannot create new jobs sustainably, it most certainly, absolutely can redistribute the revenue that it currently spends on goods and services. So, I'm going to propose, this is, a proposal for the government, our government, that is that the government needs to be a bit more bold in betting on young entrepreneurs, right? And one of the things that the government can immediately do is that ensure that, that a percentage of all the major contracts, for every major contract, a specified percentage should be awarded to qualified young-owned companies, right? So this, some people will say, okay, this is what the Procurement Act aims to address, some of these issues, but I say the Procurement Act is not loud enough. It's not loud enough, and it has to be specific to empowering young-owned companies or young entrepreneurs. And so I will confidently put forward this proposal, because we know that the government cannot create any more new jobs. We know that continuing to pour more money into the traditional models isn't going to yield any more new results. And
Ms. Shona, kindly start wrapping up.
Okay, I'm wrapping up now. And the young people simply cannot develop their businesses substantially without interventions or reforms from the government. So to the young people who want to start businesses, invest in yourself, invest in skills, be prepared to be in on the long run, make sacrifices. And as young people broadly, we need to be more organized, to share skills and build businesses that we'd want to invest in. And to organizations like the AU and the EU, I would propose that, or I would rather say that please be bold or have the courage to invest in Africans on the continent, whether and engage them thoroughly, and to be able to provide the initiatives that are or interventions that are specific to their needs. And I'm just gonna sort of end there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ushona, for your input. I think the chat room is buzzing. People want to jump to the discussion part, but we do have one more speaker, so please hang in there. Our next speaker is Ms. Pahukeni Kangayi. She will be speaking on the road of digitalization in youth empowerment. Ms. Kangayi is a young tech enthusiast with an educational background in information technology, mathematics, and information systems and actuaries. She's also one of the executive officers of the Internet Society of Namibia chapter. Ms. Kangayi, the opportunity is all yours, and I would like to give you the floor now. Is Ms. Kangayi online?
She's telling us that her connection might be spotty.
Okay.
Okay, we're trying to get in contact with Ms. Kangayi.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and start with the discussion as we
Hello,
wait for
everyone.
Ms. Kangayi. She seems. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. Yes, you can go ahead. Maybe private email. Pahukeni.
All right. Hello. Can you hear me now? Good morning, everyone. My fellow youth, all co-observe and fellow Namibian. It's a pleasure to be on this discussion. And now, all right, to define in simple terms what digitalization means and to further.
I'm gonna mute her. Oh. All right, we're having some technical challenges with Ms. Pahukeni on Ms. Pahukeni's side, so we will give her 10 minutes to sort that out. In the meantime, we'll continue with the Q&A session. This is now the opportunity for everyone to please raise their hands, or if you have already written a question or a comment in the chat box, this is also an opportunity for you to raise it out loud. I would advise our panelists to have a look through the chat and take note of some of the questions that were asked to them. Yes. All right, sorry for that. Technology. All right, so we're going to continue with the Q&A, with the discussion. So I saw two hands raised. Where did they go? We will bring her back in 10 minutes, but I think for now we can have maybe 3 or 4 questions, and then the panelists can just take note of this. Again, panelists, please go through the chat box so you can have a look and see which questions were specifically addressed to you. Can I please get some hands in the meantime, or just some indication of someone who would like to raise a question?
Hi, my hand was raised.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Hi, good day. Thank you so much. Thank you also to all the panelists. Um, so my name is Twafini, and I'm a Namibian youth. And I very much appreciate this panel discussion. I noticed that a recurring trend was, the acquisition, generation, and sharing of knowledge. And one of the things that I really thought would help all of these things come together, as well as through the technology sector, is the role of the arts. I don't know how we can talk about young people without talking about music, poetry, without talking about painting, and giving access to them as well. And also Namibian education. I would like to address this question to Patience Masua. When will the arts be taught in public schools? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else with a question? Also, please, let's keep our questions very concise. And if it's a comment, maybe let's put it in the chat box, just for the sake of time. Is there anyone else? You can just switch. Okay, 2 participants raised their hands. Just switch on your mic, because I can't see now who.
Can I start?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, I haven't really formulated in my head just yet, but it's something along the lines of I've noticed that although many Africans are very outwardly oriented, we like to see ourselves as a continent that needs to develop as a unit. A lot of people are inwardly oriented, and a lot of people do seem to take their own country's needs before any other country's needs. So how would we, as a continent, then go forward? Because each country has very different problems, whereas Namibia and South Africa have the problem of reintegrating townships and former homelands into this greater South Africa. People in Nigeria, for example, have more of a problem with access to certain infrastructures. How do we go about a sort of unified way forward, like a unified sort of path forward, whilst we have so many diverse interests when it comes to how the continent develops, especially with relations to Europe, whereas certain countries have closer ties with, for example, Namibia has closer ties to Germany than any other European country. But say, for instance, Cote d'Ivoire would have closer ties to France, and we wouldn't really see, I mean, the EU and the AU as a bloc don't have that much direct power into, in the implementation of laws and certain policies. How would we go about then that dilemma?
All right, thank you so much, Oretu. The next person with their hands raised is Edgar. Edgar, the opportunity is yours.
Sorry guys, I actually have to rush to class right now. But I was curious as to knowing, because this conference, so to speak, is set up in relation to the EU Africa Summit, right? And I understand that we live in a COVID crisis, but there are bigger issues beyond the COVID crisis, and this crisis obviously will repeat themselves in one form or another. So I was more interested into learning as to where we are as a nation, especially when we look at our education systems, why it is that, for instance, we were caught with our pants down when the COVID pandemic hit. And that speaks a lot to the quality of education, from basic education all the way to university education. And even if we talk about online learning also requires new ways of thinking about teaching and learning and all these aspects. So where are we in terms of transforming or even reforming our education system, so that we don't become this reactive entity, but rather becoming proactive to our own needs first, and then obviously to the needs of the rest of the world. I think this is something that is overlooked. Right, with the COVID thing, I feel like a lot of it is very reactionary, if that's the right word to use. I'm more interested into the strategies that are in place for being more proactive and preempting some of these issues that face our education systems? I guess that is a question that may be posed not just to patients, but to anybody on the panel.
All right, thank you so much, Edgar. We are still waiting for Pahukeni to respond. I think I'd like to give the speakers the opportunity to address some of the questions that were raised that are relevant to them. Perhaps let's just keep the responses a bit brief. I'm a bit worried with time here. But yeah, let's have one round of responses. Any of the speakers, anyone ready to respond?
Let me go first. Raquel, may I proceed? Yeah, I think your mic is muted. Okay, anyway, let me respond to a few of the issues that were raised. One was by Madam Moderator herself. She abused her power and then raised a question. But yeah, this whole issue of how can, for example, Namibian youth kind of engage, say, at the continental level. Now, I think that becomes somewhat of a tall order if we are unable to already engage meaningfully at the local level. So I'm sure a good number of young people, for example, in this country, have no idea of what Agenda 2063 is all about. For a number of times, even here, we have had NDP 1, NDP 2, NDP 3. Now we are in NDP 5, these national development plans. They are never thoroughly scrutinized such that we are in a position to hold our leaders accountable and say, okay, this is what you set out to achieve under UNDP 4. You did not achieve more than 50% of what you set out to achieve. So on what basis do you even move to NDP 5? So, but of course, we don't engage with this kind of very important documents that would allow us to hold our leaders accountable. There was another one from the chat room by Dominga, about action points on how we can kind of galvanize youth to participate in current national discourse. Now, some time back, there was this study that suggested that there seemed to be too much supply of democracy in Namibia, but less demand. Seems like probably Namibia is a democracy without Democrats. So the space is there, and there's no one who's going to give it to us as young people. We have to claim the space. So for as long as we are kind of not engaged, I mean, that space is going to kind of remain unclaimed, as it were. Yeah, I think let me stop there for a moment and allow other panelists to say a thing or two. Thank you.
Any other panelists on standby to briefly respond?
I'd like to respond. I don't know if you can you hear me? Right. I don't know if I captured all of the questions correctly, but I'm reading through the chats and I see a couple of questions. One being whether Namibia is ready to introduce online learning. Yes, we have an access gap. Yes, many schools don't have access to education on an online platform. But also, yes, many schools have successfully implemented online education. So, and I'm going to answer this twofold with another question that was also asked in terms of whether or not we shouldn't we rather embrace offline learning as opposed to online learning. The reality is that we're part of a global network. We're part of everything is being digitized. My argument is not that online learning should replace offline learning, rather that online learning should complement offline learning. The reality that we face in Namibia is that when you say there's an option for online learning, that option is really only available for people that have access. And if you don't have access, then how do we streamline the two? You have offline learning together with online learning. So having more modes of study as opposed to simply having an offline mode of study, if that makes sense. There was also a question on, and this is from Romy, that says access to ICT is one, but should we also not reflect with the schools in rural areas and some in urban areas should have basic computer studies as a subject? 100% correct, 100% correct. Many of us, many of our students come to university and they've never seen a computer screen in their lives. So the reality is that yes, 100%, I fully agree. Yes, computer skills, not only for purposes of online learning, but for purposes of, appreciating how, as a global community, everything is being digitized. So we need to stay up with the times. And as such, 100%, yes, basic computer studies should be a subject from pre-primary, if you ask me.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Patience. You still get an opportunity to do your closing remarks where you'll perhaps give some key recommendations that could inform the AU-EU inputs from the Namibian perspective towards the summit. Is there any other panelists that would like to respond? The chat room is buzzing. Even I'm just like, I don't know how you're going to filter through those questions and remarks. Is there anybody else from the panelists that would like to briefly respond to some of the insights that were shared in the chat room? Loide, Rochelle.
Hi.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Max has a question regarding inaccessibility to land by young farmers, the disconnect between the elderly and the youth, also with reference to land. My suggestions or recommendations to lawmakers would be that there is a very, very thorough exercise in terms of assessment made of the needs and the risks around land reform. You have a lot of young people that just want to start a business. You have a lot of elderly that sit on communal setups. You also have people that sit on commercial setups. Now, the one risk in terms of business, when sitting on a communal land, is that you can't use it for security. It doesn't really give you a lot of investor appetite because it's very risky when ownership is not in your hands. A start would be to have an integrated approach where a number of youth can be resettled, for example, on a piece of land, and government can still, monitor the situation, and it can be rotational so that everyone gets a chance to be able to try out whatever they're doing. So ideally, you wouldn't want to just give everyone 99 years of lease. We could make that shorter. We could have 5 to 10 year lease, put it up in groups. So much so that you can see how proactive people really are. There's a lot of people on resettlement farms that only have the farm and have done absolutely nothing. So there's a few things in terms of policy that can really be attended to. The length of the lease and also the age. It doesn't really make sense to start farming at the age of 70. If you're in retirement, we need to start condition our minds that that's not the time to start. Like any business, it should be taken as a serious business. It's not a sort of a vacation. I hope that answers your question to a certain extent, that in terms of policy, we can look at shortening leaseholds. We can look at creating a huge number or a higher number of people on one land. That is really, it encourages smart farming because you don't need 10,000 hectares anymore. You can farm on 5 hectares if you apply the smart farming and precision farming techniques. If you benchmark them, people around the world in other countries don't have the land we have, but they are farming upwards. They're not farming sort of horizontally, if you get what I'm saying, because they try to make do with what there is. And I think we're very, very lucky to be in a country where you can be a beneficiary of 10,000 hectares, 5,000 hectares, etc. So yeah, that would be my recommendation on a short term. On a long term, of course, we would have to really assess the risks and sort of the age groups in terms of the land reform program. It's very worrisome that the majority of land beneficiaries are past their working age. Yeah, so in terms of youth, we need to get involved. We need to go to these offices. Please go to the ministry, speak to them, tell them what you're doing, and just never give up.
All right. Thank you, Rochelle. Loide, I'd like to give the opportunity to you before we get Pahukeni on again. She says she's finally having better connection. Yes, Loide, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madam Moderator. Just want to, I think there was a question about corruption and sort of biased procurement practices. We've had the same experience. I can tell you, for example, that we've been trying to get contracted by the government or Ministry of Health for the past 3 years, unsuccessfully. And recently, we then saw that the government put out a contract, a direct contract to the big guys. Like, it didn't go on tender. It was they basically put out a direct contract. So that is 100% our same our experience when it comes to procurement. So one of the things that we were forced to do in terms of access to market is after a few tries or several tries, we had to then look at forming strategic partnerships with other professionals. So we were then forced to change locations several times, and we had to move into a medical center, which provided us a bit more market. But basically, it came down to formulating more strategic partnerships. Or broadly, as the smaller laboratories or lab owners, we came together and we decided, we actually took a decision quite recently to take the fight to the Competition Commission, because there's simply no other way to go around some of these issues. You just have to go that legal route, because the environment is anti-competitive and their mandate is to fight that. So that's where we stand currently, if I should put it that way. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Loide. I do want to apologize to the participants that we're not doing very well with time, so please bear with us. There's so much to unpack, and the chat room is really buzzing. So I see more questions are coming through here. Lucy's just going to send a message through. Please keep an eye out for that, so that we get a better idea as to which questions were not answered, so that we can make sure that everyone has their question answered. So please, panelists, also go through again, because there are some questions that you did not address in these few remarks that you just made. So maybe it would be good to sort of touch on them in your closing remarks. We are trying to get Pahukeni on, she says, in 5 minutes. So I think what we're going to do now is we'll take more hands. We have a few hands here. Frida, I think had hands up for a while. Frida, the opportunity is yours. And then after Frida, we'll have Desiderius January. Frida?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm Frida Lucas, and I'm the chapter coordinator for ISOC Namibia. I just have a question to patients and maybe perhaps a suggestion. I just wanted to find out, in terms of accessibility and affordability in the education sector, have you guys looked at community networks? Because I believe they would work better, seeing that you mentioned that online classes and as well as physical classes will coexist. So I just wanted to ask if you have looked at community networks as an option, because they would really do. So my suggestion is in the education sector, for accessibility and affordability for the internet, please look into community networks. They would really be of use, especially for rural areas. Thank you.
Can I speak?
Yes, you can.
So my question goes to patients. and I've shared it in the chat room. So I would just like to highlight them. So in her closing remarks, I would like Patience to answer the following two questions. Do you think more could have been done by the Namibian government to narrow the gap of accessibility and affordability of, these e-learning in schools in the education system? And as a middle income country, do you think that our level of technology can be attributed to that of any other middle income country in the world? And are we really satisfied, of our level of technology that we are having in this country? I thank you.
Thank you, Desiderius. We'll take a question from Mark Alex, and then I see Oreto's hand is up again. If your question or a comment in the chat box has not been addressed, please raise your hand so that Lucy can take note of that. And then maybe we can read it out for you if you don't want to say it out loud, or we give you the opportunity to speak. Because we really want to make sure that during this discussion time, participants get to participate as much as possible. So I want to give the opportunity to Mark Alex. If he's not here, can Dominga come on?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. My question is to Ms. Loide. Can you perhaps give us insight on how we can amplify the creative arts and industry as a means to create jobs in Namibia? Thank you.
Right. Imelda, the opportunity is yours.
Good afternoon, good morning. Thank you so much, IPPR, for this opportunity. I really appreciate the platform that you have created for youth and everyone to engage with these issues. My issue or my contribution is from a gendered perspective or gendered lens. It is around the issue of governance and political involvement of young people. And I want to talk about the issue of women being always sort of left behind when it comes to knowledge on issues of politics and governance. So, and it's for various reasons. It's around issues of, because she's always caring for kids at home, or that she is a school dropout, and different issues. So I was just thinking, is there a platform or a way that IPPR could, for example, make these issues, or even politicians who are young, to engage with the youth in the community, whether it's just an open day where the politicians can come and talk to young people in the community to find out more about opportunities and how their issues can be addressed. Thank you.
All right, I see another hand, Shikambe, the opportunity is yours, briefly.
Okay, hello. Speaking is Shikambe. Actually, my name is Philip Manjebo, so Shikambe, that's my calling. So my concern is on the education that we are getting in Namibia or in Africa. What's really the purpose or the aim of our education? Because you see, few people or kids managed to go to universities, and most of them they just ended in grade 10. That was in the past. Or for now, they just ended in grade 11. They didn't even go to grade 12. But now, if those ones that are going in the street now, what are they gaining from the education they are getting? They just the aim of our general education. I was even listening one day to the minister explaining about the current curriculum. She didn't even talk about the aim, like after you complete this level in our education, you are capable of getting this and getting this. Just explaining, no, our education is from grade 11 to grade what, it's like this, but you're not telling us. We want like you to tell us our purpose of education is to improve people like to change our cultural way of living to a modern way. Even if now, like now we're having online education coming in. Can you now explain to us our purpose of education is to make sure that everyone after school they are being able to go use computers, being able to go use phones. Like when you are going, even after I matriculate, I went to UNAM. So there we found
Mr.
an online course already.
Shikambe,
Yes.
Mr. Shikambe, sorry, your network
Can
is
you
not
not hear
very
me?
good. I'd advise you to write out the rest of your comment in the chat box for the sake of time. But thank you so much for your input.
Oh,
All right.
all right.
I would like to give, yes, thank you. I would like to give the opportunity to Ambassador Antila to respond to one of the questions that were raised on Euro-African issues. Ma'am, the opportunity is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So I've been listening to this very exciting discussion. I must say to all of you that this has been one of the best discussions on these items I have had during my 1 year stay now in Namibia. So thank you for all. But Oreto was asking about the, about the Euro-African political relations, about what are we going to do to raise the quality of education, especially for the poorer countries, and what about our cultural relations, and then transfer of technology issues. These issues are at the core of the forthcoming EU-Africa summit. We want really to strengthen our political relations with Africa. We have long relations, and we want to strengthen our relations, and like in the discussion came out, it must be inclusive, everything what we do, public sector, private sector, civil society, academia, we must work together. So we are doing a lot for the quality of education. For instance, here in Namibia, education has been the other of the two key focal sectors for European Union support here. We have provided budget support for education sector reform, and we have focused there on early childhood development, and then together with Germany on vocational training. And we are planning now our programs further from 2021 to 27, and education should be part. We have proposed that education will be part of it, and this will be happening in many other countries. And technology, digitalization, you heard that's one of the priorities of the new Commission. We want to explore and use the technology for sustainable development goals. These are very, very important for us, and I'm very happy that you raised them. But thank you to everybody. I don't speak, I speak longer. Thank you so much for this exciting discussion. We must find a way of continuing it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those few remarks. We would like to give the opportunity to Pahukeni, because she really took the time out to prepare a response to our invitation. So we do want to accord her the opportunity to just share her insights with us. Pahukeni, are you online? Pahukeni?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Okay, you can go ahead. Yes, there's an echo on your end, but
all right.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Is it better now? Is there still an echo? Is it okay now?
Can you? Yes.
Just try speaking.
Just
Can you hear me now?
Yes, just keep speaking. I think just keep going.
All right.
Pahukeni, just
to be online again. So I'm having
it's not gonna work.
is it working?
Hi, Pahukeni. No, we can't really hear you. You're cutting out a lot. But what I would suggest is that since we can't really hear you, we would really love to hear what you have to say. Could you please repeat yourself and just say what you wanted to say during this time, and we'll put it up on our social media and we'll make it available to everyone after the fact. And everyone can ask questions under that post if that's okay, since we can't really hear you right now.
I think Lucy did a wonderful job at suggesting a way forward there. Lucy has been my wonderful technical manager over here.
I should probably do a pre-recording. Is that fine?
Yes, I think that's what we're going to do. Lucy is going to chat with you offline, and then she will just give you a bit of direction in terms of going forward. But thank you so, so much that you took out the time to prepare. We will definitely take your input into consideration for the final report that will be released sometime next week. With that said, I think we have had quite a lot of questions raised before we tried to get Pahukeni on. I want to give this opportunity to our panelists to do their closing remarks. I wish we can continue having a wonderful conversation, but unfortunately people have lives. So I think what we'll do now is the panelists must just give their closing remarks, and in their closing remarks, maybe they can address some of the pertinent issues that were raised in the chat. But it will be very important for the sake of the report that each panelist needs to highlight at least 2 or 3 key recommendations with regard to their topic on how AU-EU synergies can be created or better strengthened between the African Union and the European Union for the sake of both our different, the African continent and EU member countries as well. So it will be very important that we're able to pull out key recommendations. So the panelists should please highlight those for the sake of the report. I'd like to give the opportunity to the panelists now. Any one of the panelists ready to do closing remarks and recommendations for the future you want? Where are our panelists?
Call them up on name.
Ellison, Loide, Rochelle, Patience.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Raquel. I did prepare a very short PowerPoint presentation, so I think I would just, for the interest of time, I would just, after the event, share it such that I don't repeat some of the recommendations that I somewhat already alluded to. But just a quick one in terms of an issue that was raised by Melta, if I may, which is this issue of women kind of being left behind in the political arena and the like, and probably what should be done. I mean, she addressed that question to IPPR, but probably I can just say a brief comment on that. I think in Namibia now it is, I mean, we are one of the lauded countries in Africa in terms of women representation in positions of decision making, but it seems to me that there is a need for that kind of transfer from descriptive representation to substantive representation. So we have a lot of women MPs out there. So the question then becomes, what is it that they are doing for the interest of women as a group? So probably the opportunities are there for women to kind of make their mark, but probably those opportunities are not used productively. In closing, I think with regards to young people in this country, I think what Frans Fanon said some time back is quite very pertinent with regards to young people. And that is, if I may quote, he said, out of relative obscurity, every generation must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it. And us as young people in this country, what is our mission? What is it that we want? Have we discovered our mission? And for as long as we are not clear in terms of what is it that we want as young people, as long as we are not kind of taking up the space to somewhat set the agenda, then probably we have already betrayed our mission before we even discover it. So with those few remarks, thank you to everyone, and thanks for those who have joined us for what I think was a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Dr. Chira. I need to address you properly. You deserve it. Any of the panelists ready to go to give their closing remarks as well as key recommendations on the future we want in terms of Africa-EU relations?
I'm ready.
Loide? I feel like I like a teacher, I just need to do roll call at this point.
I'm ready.
Loide, oh, Rochelle, okay. No, Rochelle, you can go. It looks like you're ready. Yeah.
Thank you very much to all the participants, IPPR. These are the kind of platforms we pray and hope to have for a very long time to come. In closing remarks, I'd just like to say, in terms of the agriculture sector, very key to the future that we want is integrated and research-based studies, not just studies on specific farming, but the platforms for the youth to engage policymakers. Very important and key to the future we want is platform. Second to that, also very important is public and private partnerships in all spheres. From a thought leadership perspective, I always say that it's not always about the money. Sometimes we need to get the policies and business environments right for us to give enabling environments to young business people, especially in agriculture. For us to create these enabling environments for business people, students, academia, all the industries, we have to create platforms and also discuss and share ideas. My final recommendations in terms of on the short term and long term in the agriculture sector, also looking at COVID, would be that we would start creating cooperatives for the young people and create or give accessibility to land, and that we will push for smart farming techniques through the government and institutions such as the IPPR, and Ambassador will also know what kind of organizations would, that we will actually fast track opportunities for young people to have access to, even if it's temporary land, not just capital and funding, but to sort of create smart partnerships amongst young farmers. And also generally just opportunity. We must be enablers of opportunity. We must be enablers of unlocking potential in all spheres. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Rochelle. I'll give the opportunity to Loide, Shona.
Yes, I think there were some questions. I think two questions that I didn't quite get a chance to address, and that's on the Africa Medicine Agency. I would think that it's one of the key things will be participation by the youth. That's very key. We need to put ourselves forward to participate in this in the establishment of this agency. I know there's a treaty that still needs to be formulated and agreed upon. And the opportunity here would lie in research and development, because the youth are really, that speaks to the youth. Obviously, there would need to be capacity development. That's very important in terms of manufacturing pharmaceutical products. That's an area that's still quite underdeveloped. But basically, what I would say is that we need to avail ourselves to actually participate in such platforms. And broadly, as young people, we need to get ourselves organized well enough for us to actually be able to push for participation on these tables. It's very, very important. We can't fight this battle as separate units. It has to be a collaborative effort. And we have to come together and have that unified voice, because they can't ignore us. If it's a group of us, there's no way they can ignore us, right? So, but as individuals, they can easily tell you, oh no, they can send you off, or they can keep delaying the process. But as a collective, there is no way they can ignore us in the long term. So that's just broadly for young people. And then there was a question about creatives. What I would suggest is that creatives look at how do you take your art from art to a business. So create a business model. You have to formalize that in terms of creating a business model. You're looking at who's your target customer, your value proposition, how you're going to market. You need to look at structures like admin, bookkeeping, and all of that. So how do you take your art from you drawing your art and a few people enjoying it to a business actually generating income from the art? So that is very, very key. And I know creatives are creative and they really don't want to hassle with some of these nitty-gritty details of business, but that's how you create jobs, and that's how you actually develop a business. You have to put up the structures. You have to look at models. You have to look at your target. You have to look at your target customer. You have to engage. You have to. There's no other way around it. So, and like I said before, smaller businesses, for you to move a small business from, generating income for yourself and creating jobs, is you need to formalize. You need to formalize your business activities, right? And that's the only, it's really the only way around it. Yeah. And so just recommendations for the EU, AU, I would just say I would like to re-emphasize the need to engage, to invest in the African youth on the continent. So engage the youth and try to identify their specific needs, as opposed to coming up with your own solutions and then try to implement those solutions on the continent. Engage, take the different approach, engage the youth, let them guide you on what their specific needs are, and then invest in the innovation that speaks to the challenges of the continent. And I say this because from experience, I've done a lot of, pitching for funding and grants from a lot of organizations from Europe. And one of the problems is that they already come with their own agenda as to what they're trying to fund, or which innovations, which areas they're trying to fund. That doesn't work. It doesn't work, because the only people who can guide you on what is necessary or what is key for the key solutions for Africa are the Africans. So unfortunately, or well, I don't know if it's unfortunate, but engage, you need to, these organizations need to engage the youth on the continent. These innovations or interventions rather need to be specific to those needs, right? So yeah, broadly from my side, yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Loide. That was quite insightful. I'd like to give the opportunity to Patience to wrap up, give us a closing remarks and her key recommendations.
Thank you, Raquel. I'll be short. I don't think I got to all of the questions, but I don't think there'll be enough time. The AU and the EU, if not already, need to have a greater level of data sharing in terms of education. What are the models of online learning that have worked in the EU countries that we can adopt and tailor make to specifically suit the needs of students and learners in AU countries. That's number one. Number two, I think perhaps looking at the possibility of synchronized curricula, both for higher education and basic education. Obviously, this will allow for a greater credibility, and it would rely greatly on quality control. There needs to be a high level of quality output, but because of joint curricula, perhaps not across the board, but I mean, your VTCs, certain modules in your universities, and in basic education, looking at joint curricula. And I think in line with the notion of globalization, that is really, I think those are two critical areas that we can look into. But also a need for greater access to basic internet, basic network. Somebody brilliantly in the comments said, one laptop, one student. One student, one laptop rather. One of the critical challenges that we had recently with NASFAF, because students had 34,000 students who didn't have laptops, had to have laptops. And then we had a problem of procurement and who had to get the tender, etc. So the point really is, if we want a collective education, one of our problems can't be corruption. Really, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, fighting for students to get laptops. And the first thing that people think of is feeding their bellies. That is problematic. So if the AU and the EU could really build structures and mechanisms to really increase accessibility to education across the board, and somehow find a way to mitigate some of those, embarrassing challenges that we faced as a country. It's really embarrassing if the first thing we think of, I mean, really, we're trying to get laptops, we're trying to educate a nation, and really the first thing you think of is, who are we going to give the tender to, etc. Right? And that's really, my passion really lies in accessibility to education, free education, because that's the only way you can have accessibility to education, both higher and basic. And those are really my closing remarks. If there's anything, my email address is available, and we could engage on that platform. But really, accessibility, data sharing, and perhaps looking into the notion of joint curricula between the EU and the AU. Thank you very much, Raquel.
All right, thank you so much, Patience. That was really insightful. Everybody, we've come to the end of our panel discussion this morning, actually. It's afternoon now. And it was quite enlightening. And I think what I'm seeing in the chat room is that more IPPR is a need for platforms of this nature. I think people miss us. It's important to definitely keep engaging, especially young people, on topical issues. I think what I take away for myself personally is that it's important that we take ownership. We take ownership of the agenda. Familiarizing ourselves with Agenda 2063 is very important, because this is the vision of the continent, and we are the future of this continent. So it's very important that we take ownership and familiarize ourselves with key policy documents or vision statements out there, and as well also just to really go out of our way to seek knowledge, to understand really what are we talking about when we talk about AU-EU relations. what are some of the issues or what are some of the potentials that we could harness as young people on the African continent. And another thing also is the importance to innovate as young people going forward. I think COVID-19 has really put us all in a position where we needed to think out of the box in terms of the future that we want. So that also came out really strong from the inputs from the panelists. And it's always important to work in a team. There's nothing that can be done in isolation. There's no lone wolf syndrome here. So it's important as young people, we understand that we are all moving in the same direction. We need to work with one another first before we start demanding for things to be done for us. But it was quite the engagement. I really enjoyed some of the insights that came through from the panelists as well as the participants alike. So I want to thank you, participants. Thank you so much for keeping the chat room alive. Quite a lot of insights that you shared in there that we could not get to, but it's fine. We will report to that effect. And as for the panelists, thank you so much for making the time to prepare and really think deeply as to what AU-EU relations can look like in terms of the future that we want. I would like to also acknowledge Ms. Pahukeni, who unfortunately was not able to present, but like we said, we'll make provisions to record her input so that it can be shared on our social media pages. Facebook and Twitter as well. So thank you so much, Pahukeni. I would also like to thank the ambassador. She really stayed with us until the very end. Thank you very much. The EU ambassador, Senika Antila, Ms. Ellen Gould as well, who did introductory remarks. We also like to acknowledge her and thank her. I want to thank the IPPR team behind the scene. That's our executive director, Graham Hopwood, as well as Lucy Hopwood, who's my technical manager on my left, and Salmi Shiweda, who was really the person sending you the link and making sure that none of you miss out on this topical discussion. With that said, I would like to say good afternoon and thank you once again. And when we send out the next invitation, please do respond and hopefully we'll have you back again. Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye.
Hello, fellow Namibians. My name is Pahukeni Kangayi, as I've been introduced by the Institute for Public Policy Research. It's such a great pleasure or honor to be part of the panel of the Youth Speak initiative by the European Union delegation and the African Union. Allow me to share my views on the role of digitalization in youth empowerment. Digitalization is the use of various technologies to improve or change a business or organizational model and allow opportunities for new opportunities or value-adding opportunities. As we have all learned, during the state of emergency, a lot of organizations or businesses were not able to carry out their normal or daily operations due to the lack of ICT tools or resources. They have not invested enough, or the government and stakeholders have not invested enough in these resources to enable business to go on as usual. A lot of employees were not able to work from home. Even now, they're not able to work from home. A lot of learners and students were not able to learn and be educated from home. The internet affordability is very bad. Internet is very expensive in Namibia, and the coverage is very poor in many areas. For example, if you are in the Ochomisa area in Windhoek, it is very hard to carry on a WhatsApp call because the network is just poor. It cuts all the time. These are some of the issues that we are facing. The infrastructure is very bad, or it's underdeveloped within our country. We need a lot of towers. We need a lot of community networks, which is also a cheaper initiative for our communities, and it's very affordable. The communities are able to develop the community networks by themselves, of course, with the help or grants of stakeholders or the private sector, even civil societies. And the community does not have to be skilled or educated in IT for them to carry out a community network. They just need a few people or a team of people with different skills, different backgrounds, in able to develop this community networks. The lack of community networks clearly showed a problem in terms of education or working from home. If we had a lot of community networks that people can afford compared to the commercial data bundles, we would have not had many, we wouldn't have had many problems in terms of learning or working from home. The Internet Society with other stakeholders is one of the organizations that develops community networks or encourages and helps communities be connected to the internet. There are so many challenges within our country. A lot of people are not eager to learn. A lot of people are not open to new developments or disruptive innovation. But we have a lot of young people educated and very eager to improve our living standards. My recommendations to the European Union and the African Union would be that allow civil societies or other stakeholders to improve our policy and act within the internet ecosystem. At the moment, there is not much regulation on the internet access or affordability of internet and devices, even though this is entirely dependent on the private sector or the service providers. It is important to involve civil societies, the government, the private sector, and other institutions with young people voices to speed up the process of policy implementation or policy refinement in order for us to develop our ICT ecosystem. We would like to request for less talking opportunities and more opportunities to implement. We have enough young people and older people who are educated and well skilled or equipped to develop the ICT ecosystem. We need funding and opportunities to do this. We need a platform, and first of all, or most of all, we need to look at our policy development and implementation in order for us to carry out the development that we want for the future. It's also recommended if the European Union and African Union endorses young people or qualified young people to be part of the think tanks and the task forces of the ICT ecosystem in order for us to speed up the development. What the young people want for the future is for every young person or every Namibian citizen to be connected to the internet, to be able to afford the internet and carry out their normal or what they are required, expected of society. There are so many opportunities in ICT in terms of employment and learning, and we just need a platform or resources to fund young people or to develop our infrastructure and our policies in order for us to utilize or reap from ICT and the fourth industrial revolution. The world is in the fourth industrial revolution, but if you look at Africa now, or even Namibia, majority of our people do not even know what that is. They have not experienced any bit of it because the gap is just huge. The gap between the haves and the have-nots within our country is very huge. A lot of people are not well informed or not well connected, and they have lack of opportunities, and they cannot reap anything from ICT infrastructure or ICT tools and resources. So what we want for the future is we want to be able to afford internet, we want to be able to afford ICT tools, we want to be able to be involved in the development and improvement of the ICT sector, and we want young people to be endorsed and actually taken serious.